So in this example, we're going to be looking at storing different types of data in variables. So we've already looked at how we can input data and ask the user to type it in. So if I wanted to store someone's name, I could say name equals input and give it a message, enter name. And that would allow the user to type their name in and store it. When you give Python the input command, by default, it assumes that you want to store a string. And a string is basically just words. So a string of characters. So any string of characters, anything that would start and end in a set of quotes. You can be used to store numbers, but they aren't being stored in a way that they could be used for sums. It's all been stored as characters from your keyboard. So that's a string. And by default, the input command does that in Python. But what if you wanted to store numbers, we wanted to do a sum with them or some other type of data? So you need to know the following types of data. You need to know string, which we just talked about. You need to know integer, which is a whole number. You need to know real, which is a real number with a fractional part. And you need to know booleans, which is a true or false value. So these are the four types of data we need to know. There's also the character type, which is basically a string of just one single character. But for the most part, these are the four we need to know. So by default, the input command gives you a string. So what happens if we wanted it to give us an integer? So if we wanted it to give us an integer, we would need to, let's think of an example like the age. You want somebody's age in. So age equals input enter age. So the reason this wouldn't work is because when the user types the data in, it would be stored as a string. So we want it to be stored as an integer, which is a whole number. And to do that, we use the int command. And int just turns whatever is put inside its brackets into an integer, a whole number. So basically, we want to use this int command around the input. So just around the input, type int and make sure you put the closing bracket on the end. And so now I've got age equals integer input enter age. And it's the same as the line above, except I've now just put int around it. If I wanted to get a real number, which is a number with a fractional part, 10.5, 1.0, so that would be, a number like that might be a time in a race, how long it took you to finish the race. So time, I'm going to say time equals input enter time, and the command we want to do for this one is called float. And so it doesn't use the word real, but float just stands for a floating point number, and that's more of a computing term. So it's float, and that would give us a number in. A boolean works a wee bit different, but there is a predefined function, just like the other ones, called bool. I'm not going to talk about that just now, we'll talk about that in another video. So that leaves the string, and I've already shown you how to do the string. It does it by default, but you could do this str, and str will turn whatever's inside of it into a string, and I could put input in there. So I could say input enter name. All that would do is the exact same thing as the line above, where I've just said name equals input. So name equals string input does the same thing. So there's no real point in doing it, but it's worth showing in this video. So I'm going to delete that one now. So now I've got a name coming in, an age, and a time. And if I was to print all three of these, you can see that the data is stored slightly differently. So I'm just going to print them out. So I'm going to print name, age, and time. And let's run that code and see what happens. So enter name, Put John, age 15, time, he done the race in 10.5 seconds. And then it's going to output those 3 bits of data like that. John, 15, 10.5. And although John comes out without the quotes around it, it is stored as a string.